Welcome to another episode of the Boss Experience podcast. My name is Michele Davis, and I'm your host. And today's topic is actually quite interesting. We're discussing detoxing from toxic work environments. And my special guest today is Janae Jackson. And Janae, interestingly enough, she has a background in HR, and she decided, after working as an HR professional, to become a therapist. And so she's a therapist and coach with the focus on helping people detox from all of the trauma that goes along with working in a toxic work environment. And so the one thing, when we think about entrepreneurship, we have to remember that we are not, we're multifaceted. So we have different layers to us, and we're coming into not just careers, but entrepreneurship with different layers, our childhood trauma layers, or, things that have hurt us that we haven't resolved. And strangely enough, toxic workplaces are one of them. And so my first experience with a toxic work environment actually was from a managerial perspective. So I've shared this story before, and I've shared also that my background is in nonprofit management and program development. So I was taking over as a new manager in it was a substance abuse facility for women and children, for women and that could stay with their children. I should put it because the kids weren't the ones experiencing substance use disorder. So I was taking over as a new director. I think it was like maybe my third day, and I met my part-time data specialist, who was supposed to, with grants and programs, you have to have someone input all of that information for your funding. So I remember encountering her outside, and I was like, she was just standing there with this really bizarre look on her face, not a typical look you would expect someone who would be coming to work with. So I asked her if she was lost. I had never met her before. And she says, no, I know who you are. I'm your new data specialist. I was like, okay, great. It's wonderful to meet you. And I said, is everything okay? And she says, no, I'm just preparing myself to walk in. And I'm like, okay. As a new manager, that was scary because I'm like, what is she? She's preparing for something. What am I preparing for? Well, long story short, the previous director was very abusive to her verbally, and these are her words. And, when you work in that type of setting, or any setting where it's you're working with other people, there's potential for abuse from the people that you're working with or the people that you interface with or encounter during your workday. It can be very stressful. And so I remember as a manager, and there needs to be more training on this, in the workplace. But I remember as a manager, I was, I didn't understand why she was traumatized, because nothing that she had experienced, it wasn't like a workplace shooting. It wasn't like, and so that was just, me not knowing enough to really support her. And then fast forward several years later, I ended up being in a toxic work environment myself. And actually, that's what led me to entrepreneurship. It actually threw me in. Because I'm like, there has to be a better way for me to earn a living.
Absolutely.
And I've had some guests on my show that share the same issues, and that's how they ended up starting their own business. It's not about, this idea that we're going to make billions of dollars as entrepreneurs. It was about, what do we want in our lives?
Yes.
And so, I wanted to not feel like what I was feeling at that job. And I remember for a while, when I started my business, I was like, I let them win. And I was still carrying all this craziness. But
Mm-hmm.
here I am, I've left, I'm no longer with that agency. And I had so much anger within me because I felt like they had won, they had beat me.
Yes.
And so here I am starting a business, and you're starting a business that way. You have the wrong mindset
Yes, that's so
because
true.
you're not setting yourself up for success. So, you know, I think I could have used Janae back then for her to give me both HR insights because we had a very
Yeah.
weak HR, that there was so much happening, so much toxicity, and HR was
Mm-hmm.
kind of powerless
Yeah.
because you had people. Yeah. Anyway, it was crazy. So I'm glad that we have you here because I know that there's a lot of listeners that are they're either in their 9 to 5 still and they're trying to build their business, or they are transitioning, preparing to transition
Yeah.
into entrepreneurship. So today's topic, kind of, that detox that you need to
Yeah.
do before you even begin to even think about being successful as an entrepreneur. But before we
Mhm.
get into that topic, what made like who is Janae, and what made you go from HR to therapist, and you're
Mhm.
unlicensed therapist. So,
Yes.
what made you make this transition and get into
Um,
coaching people?
Actually, if I can really start back even further before I began working in HR, I've always wanted to work in therapy and be a therapist. And that's just from childhood. And often when people end up going into therapy and doing something like that, it's from either going through their own personal work and they've decided they want to help people, or it could be from their own experiences and they've come to a place where they want to help people. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I just ended up working in HR just because of life. And so I ended up starting my career in HR. And so since I did that, I said, okay, well, let me make a career out of it and see how this goes. And over the years of doing this work and working in HR, it's very similar to your story. The things that I experienced microaggressions. I saw how they impacted me. I saw how they impacted other women who looked like me in the workplace. And I noticed that there were some overarching themes for people in terms of the ways that these microaggressions showed up for them in their lives, the ways that they would doubt themselves, the ways that they no longer started to believe in themselves or feeling like they should give up. And all of these different things I started to notice in seeing in people who were really giving their all, but not getting the same thing back in return, in the frustration that they felt, the constant kind of glass ceilings that people would experience. And so for me, I said, well, very similar to you, I don't want to be in this type of an environment anymore. And I had a unique experience because being in HR, not only did I have my own experiences, but I saw what other people experience. And I also was able to see the perspective of the employer, because as an HR person, you're an extension of management. So you're kind of extending their thoughts, their beliefs, their policies as you do your work. And so it did not sit well with me. And so I thought, well, there's other things that I can be doing or I should be doing. And I knew what those things were for me. So then that's why I pivoted and went and focused back into being a therapist and working in therapy and becoming licensed and going back to school and doing all of those things, because I thought that I had a unique perspective and a way that I could help people who were in those type of environments to see that there was more for themselves beyond what they were experiencing, beyond their work environment, and to help people start to see how they can see more for themselves if they couldn't, because so many people don't. I think a lot of people just go to work and they get caught up in the day to day. I got to go to work to support my lifestyle, and not realizing that your work and your life and your passion can all be one. They don't have to be these separate things. And you do work to support yourself and live, but you can do that in your passion as well and be fulfilled as well. So it's really about helping people become more fulfilled with themselves in their lives and helping them to see how they can do that.
Yeah, and I always, advise anyone that I encounter, and to just make sure that, and I wish I had known this sooner, don't make your employer the most powerful thing in your life. And I
Yes.
think it's traumatic enough when you think about it. Your employer controls a lot. They control whether you feed your family, they control whether you pay your rent, they control whether or not you can survive, make your car payments.
Right.
And your employer has a lot of power. And
Mm-hmm.
so there was a lot of times I had the position, but I didn't have the voice at the table.
Yes.
And I had, and so what does that do to one's confidence?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes time to, move on to something different. And in my case, it was entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about like how, we talked about, I guess you mentioned what it looks like in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
It does impact your confidence.
Yes.
So as people are looking to what's next, how can they set themselves up
Mm-hmm.
to recognize what's happening and make a plan? Because I always advise people, have another stream of income.
Mm-hmm.
Have another stream of income. And I think I had a previous guest on the podcast, and she talked about how she was in this highly toxic work environment, and it was so liberating and free to be able to plan her escape.
Yes. Yes, it
It
is.
was liberating, and it was, she had felt a sense of freedom because she had options.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some listeners here that maybe aren't putting their all into everything, and they don't know what their options are. So let's talk about,
Yeah.
how exactly do you detox? I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
turn the floor over to to you. How do you detox? How do you decide what's next?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's start there.
How do you do it? Yeah. No, when you say have a plan, that is so important because that's one of the main things that I say is to be strategic. So, and when I say be strategic, that includes having a plan. It also includes, though, for the individual, is to one, understand that you can't take these things personally. Because if you take these things personally, then like you said, they travel with you as you try to go and do other things. So it's like I cannot internalize somebody else projecting this negativity onto me. So the one thing is I have to understand who I am. And I have to understand that my talents and my abilities got me in the door and they can get me somewhere else. So then I can use my skills and leverage them to go and do whatever else it is that I want to do. So I have options from the beginning already, just understanding in the ways that I can leverage my skills, understanding that these things are not mine to hold. So I don't need to take these things personally. And then also starting to think about and look at what's really important to me. What are the things that I really enjoy doing? What are the things that I'm really good at doing? What are the things that I would do if money had nothing to do with it at all? It's just something that I would still do all the time. What are the things that people come to me and ask me for help with? What are the things that, when I hear about it, I'm involved in that conversation or I'm involved in that topic and I have something to say and something to contribute to it? Because those are the places that I can start to see where I can carve out my life that fits for me, where I can start to live my purpose, because I'm starting with things that are inherently important to me. So I think that's one of the first places that I tell people to start, is to think about all of these different things. And then you can start to see, well, how can I create my life around this? How can I create my life around this topic? Because there's so many different ways that I can do it, and expanding my mind to know that it's going to look different than how a job looks. Because I think that's another thing. A lot of times we get so focused on work and how work is structured for us that when we see things for ourselves in other ways, we still think of it in a perspective of work. Well, how do I make this like a job? And it's like, well, it may not look like a job. So be open to understanding that it can look like a lot of different things. And you just staying focused on your passion and what's important to you, it will play itself out. And you just got to start too. That's the other thing that's very important is, sometimes we can get so caught up in, well, I've got to get this plan, I got to get this ready, and I got to start where you are. So with whatever equipment you have, with whatever tools you have, with whatever knowledge you have, you start from there and then you build it and grow. You know what I mean? And we think about these things in grand ways because that's important. You want to think about it in a grand way. But when you start small. You start with what you have. You start with where you are, and then you keep going from there as you contribute and you consistently put more into it. That's how it will grow.
Right. And so when we, I think we make things more complicated than they need to be. And we
Mm-hmm.
overthink our skills. We ignore our soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
And, I did a previous podcast episode, how to leverage your 9 to 5. And that's something we need to think about when we're on that 9 to 5, just like you were mentioning. Assess your skills and take advantage of any training that you can get a
Mm-hmm.
hold of. You
Mm-hmm.
know, meet people.
Yes.
Who can you meet that you want to keep in touch with, that you can see being an asset for where
Mm-hmm.
you're going. Don't worry about where you're at right now. Look at your
Yes.
future. Where are you going? And so I definitely think that people discount themselves, and a lot of that is the confidence. And I focused on confidence all throughout season 3.
Mm-hmm.
People come from the toxic work environments, and they have a lot of issues. So speaking of issues, what is that if I'm presently in a toxic work environment, what does that look like when it's time for me to start a business, or it's time for me to, what does that look like emotionally for me? Because we have to remember we're coming into the workplace with, you know, other stuff that's unhealed, from our
Mm-hmm.
past, and things that we haven't resolved emotionally. So what does that look like, and what's the danger of someone not addressing those issues and
Okay.
trying to start a business in the process?
Well, immediately what it looks like is, I think it is procrastination. It's delaying, it's stall tactics, all however you want to describe it. That's immediately what it looks like. Because there's you are when you work in a toxic environment and you're there every day, you really start to believe, well, then maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not that smart. Maybe I can't do these things because I'm constantly trying and nothing's happening. So then maybe it's not for me. So those are the things that you have to battle with yourself, and you have to tell yourself that. That's why I say not to internalize these things. Um, because that is what it looks like. It looks like you not believing in yourself. It looks like you thinking that you need to have some sort of other support in order to get things going. It looks like you not really believing that you can be the one to do this and make this change for yourself. And really, it is only up to you to make that change. And I think what's important for people to understand and know is that you've got to start becoming very comfortable with being uncomfortable all the time. Like, a lot of times what I tell people is, if you're pulling yourself back from something and you're saying, oh no, I'm not going to do that. If you're saying it because it just doesn't feel like something you normally do, you're not used to it, that's your comfort zone talking. That's your comfort zone saying, oh no, don't do that. Just stay where we like to be safe. Now, if you ask yourself this question and you pull yourself back and you're telling yourself to pull back on something because there's a legitimate safety issue, that's legitimate, and you listen to that. But when it's just you saying, not for you, and you give yourself all these other excuses, that's an indicator that you should push forward, because then that means your mind is just saying, okay, stay in the comfort zone. And you got to keep saying, oh, wait, no, I got to get out of my comfort zone. So whenever my mind is telling me, oh, that's not really for you, think about why, because it could be your mind just telling you to stay in a space that that's familiar for you and that's not going to give you any surprises. And when you're ready to grow, you're going to consistently be uncomfortable. You're going to consistently be pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, what you're used to. You're going to be speaking to people you're not used to be speaking to. You're going to be speaking in general in ways that you probably aren't used to speaking because you aren't used to your voice being heard. So it's like, okay, if I work in a
Okay.
toxic environment, I'm used to people overlooking me, not paying attention to me, people kind of direct instructions to me and I get them done. So when I'm an entrepreneur, this is all on me now. I can't look to someone else. So that means I've got to really empower and believe in myself and know that I just have to keep going. And that's very important. Having support is very important. And whether that support is professionally or personally, it really has to be support. It can't be somebody that's like, oh, well, putting doubts in your mind. Oh, maybe you don't want to do this. Oh, maybe you need to slow down. Oh, maybe that's not the support you need. You need the support that's going to say, oh, you have that idea. You can do it. You should do it. Go forward. That sounds great. Keep going. Even when there's doubts, it's like, okay, if there's doubts, I have to reasonably stop and assess what's going on, but I still have to keep going. So that's very important. So having that support so that you can keep going, even in the days where your mind's saying, oh, maybe this isn't for me, you got to be able to have something or some place where you can charge yourself back up again and keep going and to keep that consistency.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when people come out of their career, they
Mm-hmm.
immediately look outside of themselves because they don't believe enough in their own skills. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to think about it. How much did your employer make from your skills?
Yes.
How much did your employer make? But somehow you're not able to monetize your own skills. And so
Yes.
they immediately go and look outward in social media land or wherever for their business idea when the business that they can start is right within them.
Exactly.
And that's what I work with a lot of my clients on, discovering that profitable business idea that's within them. So
Mm-hmm.
folks transition. So where does therapy come in? So let's talk about that. So you're a therapist. So
Yes.
people are coming in, they're coming out of this toxic work environment. I can see where I could have used a therapist
Mm-hmm.
because, I was, I had all these other issues. I was like maybe a couple of years out of my divorce. I had, trauma from my childhood. I had, coming out of this toxic workplace. I was a mess trying to structure a business
Yeah.
in all of this chaos. So I could see where I needed a therapist because I was
Yeah.
also angry how I was treated, and
Mhm.
and I held all of that within me, that I was angry about how I was treated, and it took some personal work for
Yeah.
me to really sort through those feelings and realize I have to let that go.
Mhm. You
Yeah,
do.
I'm not going to be successful in this business if I'm harboring all these emotions, this anger, even seeing some of the very people that cause the issues, smile at them, let them know you can survive this. So
Mhm.
let's talk about where does therapy, like, where does therapy come in? Like,
For well, it can be different for everyone, but I think a lot of the clients that I have, they are just beginning on their journey to kind of pursuing their purpose. And some people have kind of already started therapy. Um, I think what would be helpful is to start it from the beginning. You know what I mean? Where you can actually have somebody that can support you, where you can have a professional that can help you talk through options about what it is that I want to do. And I think what is so important about therapy and what ends up happening sometimes for people is there's other things that we talk about as well, because of kind of everything else that we've talked about, how these things can impact us. um, it can be very much like, however, if you grew up in a traumatic environment, it can be very similar to that. And it can remind you of that. And if you aren't aware, it will impact you in very similar ways. And for people that they'll start to realize and see and make those connections for themselves as they go into therapy and they say, oh, wow, I see where I was letting my employer deny me, similar to how I was denied as a child when I grew up. And I can see now how I was susceptible to that because I didn't actually fix it from when I was a kid. And now I don't have to do it in that way because I can see it differently now. And so that's very helpful for people. So I think therapy is helpful in the beginning. It's definitely something that you can do on a short-term basis. You don't have to do it for a long-term basis. And I think that it's, if anything, it's definitely fulfills that need that I was talking about for having support and having really appropriate support, because sometimes our family is not the best support for us in that way, especially as we embark on this journey. And so having a professional where you can get that perspective that you may not have had anywhere else, or you may not get from your family or friends. And again, having that confidentiality, but then also, again, addressing those things that maybe caused you to be in that environment in the first place, that caused you to sit somewhere longer than maybe you should have because of other things that were going on. So that's why I think therapy is so helpful. And that's where I do think it really does come into play. So in the beginning, it's a great time to start. As soon as you are aware, is a great time to start. Whenever you realize that you need support and you start to feel like, I don't know if I can really sustain myself in this journey, that's a great time to start. So yeah, there's definitely so many opportunities, but I would always say start at the beginning when you're just getting ready and you're just going. This is just part of that work that you're doing for yourself. It's a journey for you that encompasses all aspects of your life. And I think that's what people, again, don't realize. They kind of compartmentalize everything. Okay, now I'm on entrepreneur journey, but entrepreneur is me. Everything I bring to it is me. So then if I have things I need to work on for myself, that would be a good time to do it now as I go on this journey. So I'm working on me. So it's really about kind of helping you bring it all together so that you really understand that this is my life, and I get an opportunity. I can control it, and I can control it how I want. And when I am grounded in who I am, I can do that, and I can believe in myself, and I can go forward.
Yeah, you said quite a few interesting things. And there's 3 points I want to kind of highlight. One is you mentioned, all of the things that go into, what you're feeling when you're in the midst of working in a toxic work environment. All of that spills over into your home life too, your relationships. So if you're like, having, bad relationship after bad relationship, or there's problems with how you're feeling at home when you're with your children, your partner. Those are, it all ties in together. And the
Mhm.
other thing I wanted to say was, that I like that you said, the family may not be the right support, particularly if your family was either they were a part of the pain that you may have experienced in the past,
Mhm.
or they co-signed it. In
Yeah,
other words, they ignored how you felt, or they ignored your experience. So it's
absolutely.
always good to have someone on the outside. And your particular focus is in your therapy. It's not that you don't focus on other things, but you focus on helping people deal with those emotions coming out of
Absolutely.
work. And you even wrote an ebook about it, right?
Did. Yes, I did.
Tell us about this ebook you have.
So the ebook, the idea actually came from an understanding that as much as I want to help everybody individually one-on-one, I can't. And it's just not feasible for everybody to do it in that way. So I did the ebook as a way to have a guide for somebody where they could say, okay, well, I can go back to this and use this as a reference point for myself. I can have a way to identify what I'm experiencing, see how it is impacting me. But then beyond all of that, then how do I start to begin to live my purpose? What does that even look like? And so that's really what the ebook is for. It's for anybody to be able to kind of take it and start the journey for themselves. If you're not able to have a therapist, if you're not able to do all of the things that we talked about on your own, you can use this ebook and go through it and say, okay, I have a place where I can start now, and then move forward in your life.
Mhm. So if someone's thinking, I want to either check out the ebook, or I want to talk to Janae, how would they get a hold of you?
So they can actually reach me on Instagram. I have my Instagram name is my name, Janae's Pen. Um, and my website is actually the same. So my website is janaespen.com. And through my website, you can access the ebook. You can actually contact me and schedule a consultation. And through my Instagram page, you can also access those things as well. But you could also just see a lot of the information that I have available and just helpful reminders that I think are good for people to remember and to understand, especially if they're going to work every day. And then also, I have a podcast that's called Realness and Chaos. And I talk about, it really is an opportunity for me to expound on a lot of these topics that I talk about in terms of the workplace and things that show up in the workplace and how they affect people, because I don't think that these topics are discussed enough, especially considering how much time people spend at work and how these things can impact people. So that's what I decided to do in my podcast. So those are all available. And that's how you usually would reach me.
Awesome. So if you had to think of one thing you could say, closing out, what would that be?
Oh my gosh. One thing that I would say is that you only have this one life that you are given, and you are meant to live it to the fullest extent in your fullest potential. It's really meant for you to live. It's not meant for you to have your life dictated to you by someone else. So the more that you are able to tap into the things that fulfill you, the more that you can share that with the world and make the world so much more beautiful and happier for everyone else.
That's awesome and beautiful at the same time.
Thank you.
And so, I think the biggest takeaway that I hope people are getting from this conversation with Janae is, don't allow your employer to have so much power over your emotions, they already have power over your finances. And so you want to position yourself to take your power back. And there's nothing like, sitting down and having a vision about something and carrying it out, seeing, picking up the ball and making that touchdown with things that you are inspired by and things that you're dreaming about doing. And don't discount your skills. If you're skilled enough to be at your job, they weren't doing you a favor by hiring you. You're there for a purpose. You've fulfilled everything you needed to do at that job, and you have the skills to do that. So don't discount that. So if you take nothing else away, understand, it's okay to experience what you're experiencing. It has nothing to do with you. And it's hard to not internalize it. But if you're struggling with, not internalizing, and you're struggling with trying to figure out what's next for you and how to make this career transition, either, connect with Janae, download her ebook. It's on her website. And Janae's pen is JENEESPEN, correct?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, so that's her website, JENEESPEN. And you can connect
Yes.
with her that way.com. Okay, with that being said, I want to thank you for being a
You're
part of
welcome.
the Boss Experience podcast. It was wonderful having you on
Thank
board.
you.
And for everyone else, I can't wait for you to tune in to a future episode of the Boss Experience podcast. Take care and be well.